Swayam Prabha. Digital India. Educated India.
This lecture we will start with this important topic of resource scheduling, and as you all know, we have looked at this figure before, where we have basically used it to introduce network analysis, where we had relationships and durations. We did the analysis, and all of these outputs you see boxed, that is early start, early finish, the late start, late finish, project duration, total float, free float, interfering float, we have learned how to calculate. Now we also discussed a little bit about resources earlier, and the focus of the next few lectures are on how do we consider resources as input to the network, and what is the kind of allocation and leveling operations we can do with resources. Okay, so when we use this term resources, it is a very common saying in construction that there are all these M's. So materials, manpower, money, machines, okay, are all the M's of construction, and if you manage these properly, you have a good project. And that's really very true, that resource management is the crux of good project management. And if you are able to use resources appropriately, there will be a lot of things which go right on your project. And you can see in this slide we have two types of resources. One is consumable, the other is reusable. So for example, something like materials is a consumable resource, it gets used up, you cannot reuse it, whereas something like manpower is a reusable resource, or machines are reusable resources. Okay, what about money? It gets consumed. Okay, so when you use the money, it gets consumed. So at a later stage, it is kind of important to distinguish whether a resource is consumable or reusable. So when we get into resources, we see they have very important influence on the schedule. We have, do you recall when we have discussed resources and its influence on the schedule? Yes, when we took up the two-span bridge, we discussed it. When we talked about duration estimation, we talked about the influence of resources and duration. So here you can see one of the critical influences is duration of activities are dependent on usage of resources and availability. So when we take construction projects, we talk about the usage of the resource, the type of resource, and all of it, and see. So we say we have a more sophisticated equipment, might be the productivity is better, might be the duration can be reduced. Okay, or if we put more equipment or people, we can reduce duration. We talked a little bit about that in the crashing, which we did in the last sessions. Now when you talk about other kinds of project where people are the resource, skilled manpower is a resource, something like availability becomes important. So let us say you want to do a design and the designer is not available, or his schedule is so tight that he's not available on that day, then the availability becomes, you can't put multiple designers and start reducing the duration of the design, just that you need that particular person for the design. So skill and availability become a very important issue when we talk about people, human resource, and highly skilled human resource. Okay, another very important issue of resources, there are significant components of the project cost. Most of the project cost is derived from resources. So if you can keep track of resources and you can actually look at what has happening to the resource, you actually keep track of the project cost, or you can even plan how the project cost is going to vary with time. So as we discussed, if you schedule resources properly, it will have a positive impact both on the time and the cost. Okay, so the first influence here is more on the time, and the second is on the cost. And improper scheduling is the reverse. You're going to really land up with problems, and this is one of the most common issues on projects where the resource management is not done properly. Okay, so resources are idle. If resource is idle, like people are idle, which means that you're paying them but no work is getting done, and as a result the project will be losing money. Okay, or even equipment. So as we say, if you go to a project and the tower crane is idle, which is a valuable resource, it is sitting there and losing money. So management of resources is very important. Now we discussed this before. So if you take the two-span bridge example, what are the resources here? What are the resources you see here? Yes, for the casting operation you need formwork, you need all these forms, you need equipment to mix concrete, you need people to pour, yes, you have reinforcement. Okay, so you have people resource, we don't see the people here, but you have people resource, you have formwork equipment resource, you have material resource like concrete and reinforcing steel. Okay, you have an equipment resource here, you need a truck to transport. So you can cast all these beams and keep it there, but if you don't have a truck to transport it, you're not going to achieve the objective. Okay, and then you might recall this calculation where we found the duration of casting beams based on number of resources we mobilized. So we said if we want to reduce the duration, that means we needed more formwork. So if we have more formwork, which means your mixing operation has to be, your concrete output has to be done faster, which means you have to have an appropriate mixing machine to be able to do that. So if so all of these matter. So resources really drive the duration. Okay, now we come to this question. So we understand the importance of resources on a project. What decisions do we need to make about resources? So here as a project manager, we understand there is materials, okay, there is manpower, okay, there's machinery, there's money. What are the decisions we would want to take? We know that resources drive the duration. We know that resources, if not used properly, will lead to cost overrun. What are the other, and then we also seen so far how we get time based output from our network analysis. Now if we combine this network analysis and the knowledge of resources, what are the decisions we will be able to make?
Quantity of resources.
Yes, so for example, when you say quantity of resources, if I take a design drawing and I do a quantity takeoff, I do get quantity of materials, for example. Is that what we are talking, what do you mean by quantity?
No.
Yes, so I have my total project quantity. Is that yes, that's useful, but can we get more than that on a project?
Time of entry of resources
yes,
into the site.
You can get a weekly resource plan. Okay, what is the point you were mentioning?
Manpower.
Yes, same thing. So I can do either materials or manpower on a timed basis. I want to know how much material I need this week. Yes, how much material I need for the whole project is certainly useful information, but I need to time it. I need timing wise information. And as he mentioned, inventory then becomes important. Okay, so if you take a look, okay, we need periodic order quantities. Only if I know time, I can't order all my material in the beginning of the project. Okay, it's going to come in periodic lots, and I need to know the order quantities. I need to know storage requirements and locations. Okay, I might have a specific capacity in my warehouse. I should be able to know that, and if that capacity is exceeded, I should have alternate places to store. Okay, you'll find that large companies will try to get material requirements from multiple sites because they'll get volume discounts. So if I am buying 10,000 bags of cement versus 1 lakh bags of cement, the cement manufacturer might give me a discount, bigger discount than 1 lakh. So if I am a large construction company, I rather go with that. If I can coordinate between my sites, I rather buy the large volume rather than each site buying smaller volume. Okay, so now if these sites don't give me when they need what quantity, I will not be able to do this. So again, when I put a timeline on my resource requirements and say on a weekly basis, and here specifically material requirements, I will be able to take those decisions. The next point is custom order and delivery. Okay, so custom equipment is something which is specialized. For example, a hospital might have a special MRI machine. Okay, if you know when that MRI is going to be installed as far as your schedule goes, I'll know when to give the order. I cannot go and order an MRI within a week or two. It might take a year for delivery. I have to know when it's going to be installed to be able to make that order sequence its delivery. Okay, I will show you an example. So for example, this is a vessel that goes into a power plant. Okay, now for something like this, it will take quite some time to make it. You will have to ship it. Okay, it has to be received, it has to be erected. Now, so something like this is what we mean by the long lead time for equipment, which we are calling materials here. Okay, so this in some forms this is called equipment. I've used the term custom equipment. It's not the construction equipment, it is the equipment that goes into a plant, like a boiler, okay, or a cracking tower for a petrochemical plant. Okay, so only if I can get scheduling information with resource loading, I will be able to take all these decisions correctly. When we go to manpower, you said, we need mobilization requirement for each period. How many workers do I need? Okay, what is the skill of workers I need? It's not just workers. I'll need people like welders, I'll need masons, I'll need carpenters. A worker is not just a worker. So I need to know this kind of skill level I need in each period of time. Okay, we need to be able to understand, if it is highly skilled work like design, I said people might not be available. If people are not available, we need to be able to substitute people or reallocate work during that period in some reasonable form. If we are talking about construction work, typically the festival seasons are the time when worker availability is low. We should be able to understand that resources will dip, manpower resources on site will dip during that period, and plan work in that kind of a method. Okay, so these are some of the decisions. When you go into machinery, okay, the equipment that's used for construction, there's a lot of specialized equipment required. Okay, so for example, you have an image of a crane. Okay, this is a crane which was not that easily available. I'll have to schedule it. I'll have to say that, either if it's a company owned crane, I'll have to tell my plant and machinery people when I need it and when I will release it. Or I'm going to hire it out. Again, I'll need to know the crane is available. And this is not just cranes, it's just so much of specialized equipment today. We'll have to know when to mobilize and when to demobilize that equipment. Then preparatory work. For example, if we were going to move this into a site, you will have to take a look at all the bridges and all the culverts it's going to cross and see if it can stand the load which is going to be placed. Sometimes they'll have to put, there are kind of drains and everything on a site, and if this travels on it, it could just break. So a lot of times there are preparatory works for equipment requirements. So if I have a heavy lift crane coming into the site, I'll have to do foundation preparation, and to prepare the foundation for the crane itself is going to take time. Only then my crane can be placed on the foundation, and only then the lifting operation can take place. So you really need, so all these resource based decisions have to be planned carefully. Now another one is sharing equipment to other sites. Okay, so if you are a large company and you have a large equipment pool, I need to know, just as we said material was a volume discount on material, my equipment sharing is also very important. I cannot allot equipment to one site and keep it there forever. I need to, especially specialized equipment, I need to use it all around. Okay, when we go to money, this becomes extremely important. Okay, a lot of times emphasis is not put on the money management of a project. So we can have people management, we can have the material management, we can have machinery, but you might have heard the term that this business was very good but cash flow was the problem. What does that mean?
Input of cash flow during every month or milestone might not have come
Right.
during the particular stage when expected.
Right. So the sales was good, but sales is usually on some kind of credit, and so the person is able to sell material but he is not getting cash for it, so he doesn't have money to buy and or sustain or pay his salaries and everything else like that. So then cash flow is a very simple example of saying where cash flow is a problem. So in a project there is cash flow, right? The company buys all of this material, everything has to buy. So that is cash outflow. What is inflow? How does cash come in? From the client. On a periodic basis the client has to pay. So you have to be able to understand. So if your contractual term has certain inflow conditions, you have to make sure that your outflow conditions are in a way that you don't face a cash flow problem. So that is, again, it is a question of money and time, right? So how does money flow with respect to time? And unless you have an understanding of that on your project, you will not be able to. You might be doing a very good engineering project, but if your final cash is not there to buy materials or other things, because you built a lot of it, put it into the building, for some reason, for some contractual reason, you are not getting it back from the owner, your project is going to be in trouble. Okay, and if you look at the second point, credit planning. In many situations the construction company might be borrowing money to move things forward, and there might be a credit limit. Okay, so if my negative flow is more than the credit limit, my creditors are not going to give me more money. I don't want to be in that situation too. So there are ways I can change my cash flow. Okay, and this has to do with your network. And if you recall, we talked about floats. So when we'll see how can we use floats to vary equipment and resource loading and cash loading of a project. Ultimately all this affects profitability, even taxes. Okay, so in the end, how do you actually pay tax on on a project? What is billed, what is all this kind of, when do you get a tax break, for what do you get a tax break? Tax is also time based, right? So all of these things are very critical and have to be related to the time and hence to the project schedule. Any questions? Okay. So we will start with the basics, and we take this this example which we have worked with earlier. You are very familiar with the basic numbers of this for now, and we have seen the results in this Gantt chart. If you recall, we had the 4 activities. We had A, B, C, D, and we said that B has here 2 days float. So if I go back to the network diagram, this was the network analysis we did, forward pass, the backward pass. We have a 14-day duration. Okay, and we have the all of the critical path analysis times, and this is the resulting early start schedule and late start schedule. Is that okay? So when we have that A goes okay on all of these days, B is here. So when we resource load the schedule, what we are basically doing is putting, so in this particular case we have said there is 1 manpower resource required per each day. We are just keeping it very simple to start. So all we have done here is put the number 1 in each. Okay, so you can see each activity is loaded with 1 manpower resource based on the early start. So now what it allows me to do is simply to calculate the total resource for the project, and this is a single resource. Okay, so you can see this is going to be, so I can take this and put it in the form of a histogram, and this is my, if for this very simple example, this is my manpower loading chart for the project. So I have, you can see on all these days 1 increases to 2, then goes back to 1, and you can see that 2 is because there are 2 activities each requiring 1. Okay, I can have a cumulative plot. Okay, so all I am doing is cumulating, so I am just adding, keeping a cumulative value as I go, and it just adds up. So for manpower sometimes the cumulative is not as meaningful as for money. Okay, but a lot of times the cumulative is done to look at the progress. Okay, so you can also then plot the cumulative. So these really form the basics of how we load resources and look at resources from a bar chart, and once we do the CPM analysis. Now what would be the next variation we want to do? Yes, either that or this was, remember, for the early start. So I should be able to now see this at the, so if I move this to the late start, you can see the profile is changed. Okay, so this was the early start profile, this is the late start profile. So all I have done, so for example, if I went to the early start profile and said, okay, here I have 2 resources, or in these 2 days I have 2 resources, but people are not going to be available on day 6 and 7, I can only mobilize 1, then I would actually go in for a late start and say, okay, I will still keep it at 1 for these 2 days, but the people will come back here on these on day 10 and 11 and I am okay. Of course activity B, as you know, now becomes critical, okay, but I can still finish the project within my original duration. Okay, so this is a little bit of how you use the float of the activity to change your resource profile. Okay, any questions? Okay, so now you can see what we have here is the resource, cumulative resource, taking the early start and the late start. Okay, so you again have an envelope. Okay, right now there is probably just one, if I move B by 1, I will have an in between point, but again this is the envelope of the extreme points of my resource loading. Okay, and this is called a banana curve by some in some areas, because it will represent a banana. Okay, another important use of this histogram or of this resource is to understand over allocation. So here you can see that we are saying that I have only one person available, I do not have to, I have only a single person available, and that is the maximum resource I can mobilize, and immediately we can visually see that we have over allocated and there is one extra, I mean there is one resource we will need which we will not be able to meet. Okay, so in this situation what are our options?
Project will get delayed.
The project will get delayed. There is no way, even if I use my late start of B, I still need 2 people. Okay, the only way now is to either do B and then do C. Okay, and if I do that, I will have to, all these 4 days will get, it will get delayed by 4 days. Okay, so in some cases when resources are a constraint, there is no other option but to delay the project. Okay, so we will take another example. So this is also an example we have worked with before, and you can see the results in the bar chart. This is for the early start, and again it is a single loaded resource. It is a slightly larger example, and you can see the total resources required for a day in this first row at the bottom here. Okay, and you can see the resultant graph, the histogram here. Okay, and so here we are going to if the maximum I need is 3. Okay, but there is a profile as such, and there is also, so if I go into the late start, this is the profile, early start, this is the profile. Okay, and depending on what my availability and everything else is, I can then choose between the late and the early. Okay, now in addition to this, we are also looking at, we are now going to add cost to it. We are saying that it is, say, 250 rupees per manpower resource per day. So the minute I put in the cost, I am able to now take I will factor in the cost, and now this what you have below becomes a cost curve, it's cumulative cost. Okay, so then this becomes the total cost of my manpower resource for the project, and you can see the line in red is the early start cost curve and the blue is a late start cost curve. Now when we say cumulative cost, it has a lot of meaning, which means if I go on to this day here, I should have spent this much money is my as per my plan on my manpower resource. Okay, which means I should be able to mobilize, I should have mobilized that much money by that period. So you will find that in some cases people might just from a cash constraint point of view go in for a late. Okay, not from the precedence or from the resource or anything, just that the resource as a cash is, that they might decide to delay things because the cash will be available a little later. Any questions on this? Okay.